French filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard once said, "A story should have a beginning, a middle, and an end, but not necessarily in that order." When it comes to creating a unique narrative that is engaging for the audience, good narrative structure is essential. Many stories follow a linear timeline in the familiar style of Freytag's pyramid. But what happens when we break free from that guide? How can we as writers create unique stories through intentional narrative choices? How can form enhance our storytelling? We might find some answers in the Oscar-nominated film Memento. Written and directed by Christopher Nolan, Memento follows Leonard Shelby, an ex-insurance investigator, as he searches for the person who murdered his wife. The thing is, due to an injury, he has anterograde amnesia and cannot form new memories. He also has short-term memory loss and forgets things every 15 minutes or so. To remind himself of his goal, Leonard employs a system of Polaroids and tattoos. The film itself has two alternating timelines, one in color and the other in black and white. The black and white timeline is chronological, moving from the past to the present. The colored timeline works backwards, starting at the end of Leonard's arc and moving toward the beginning. These are spliced up and alternated throughout the movie. It is disorienting at first, but serves a narratological purpose.
And my solution to telling the story subjectively was to deny the audience the same information that the protagonist is denied. And my approach to doing that was to effectively tell the story backwards. That way, when we meet the character, we don't know, just like the protagonist, how he's met that person, whether he's even met that person before, or whether or not they should be trusted, that kind of thing.
Nolan could have kept his story linear and still have made a good film, but by chopping up the timeline and making the audience work for their understanding, he created a much more engaging experience.
Once you start identifying them, you start to realize that your process of memory is not as good as you hoped, and it's much more interpretive than you realized. And one of the things we were trying to do in the film, by putting people as firmly as possible into Leonard's head, we were really trying to make the audience question their own process of memory a little bit, the way we did when we were making the film.
So how can we examine our own stories and make mindful decisions about our narrative style? During the time of Russian formalism, scholars Vladimir Prop and Viktor Shklovsky began using the terms fabula and sujet to analyze the relationship between plot and story. Fabula can be thought of as the raw material of the story. Sujet refers to the way that raw material is organized, or the plot. In Memento, our raw material is Leonard's search for his wife's killer plus his backstory. This in itself is interesting, but not especially unique in the grand scheme of storytelling. But the sujet, the way the story is organized, makes the raw material even more interesting. Nolan leaned into one compelling aspect of his character, Leonard's difficulty with memory, and used that to guide his narrative organization. This took an average story and brought it to a whole other level. In order to move the story along in a comprehensive and effective way, each scene from either timeline needed to serve a purpose. Color scenes primarily move us toward finding the killer, while black and white scenes provide backstory on Leonard's life. The two eventually meet at the end of the film, providing a satisfying finale by answering all of the audience's questions. Through careful organization, the audience is able to find more emotional weight in Leonard's search by discovering new details about his past. Additionally, the further along we get in Leonard's search, the more questions we have about how we got to that point. Each timeline feeds into the other, so with each switch, the stakes become higher. Any familiar story can be made unfamiliar by changing the way it's told. By taking the time to think about new forms our writing can take, we can push our storytelling skills into fresh territory.